Oh, Jesus, I don't even know how to set this out. But let me just say right off the bat that I'm not going to do my usual boom intro here, right? Because I want to try and keep my sort of thread running in my head as best that I can. I want to talk about gender and sport again, and women's sport. There's a little bit of a controversy with the IAAF today, setting a new testosterone threshold for female sport. It's female sport today, not women's sport. Tomorrow it'll be women's sport. I'll mention the difference in a minute and how kind of tied up that's all become. But they've set a new testosterone level for certain running distances. Now, what I cannot find is why it's only these distances. It's from 400 metres through to 1 mile, and they've halved the allowable testosterone level for female athletes, which is interesting in and of itself, and what I primarily want to talk about. The reason that I like talking about this, and this must be about the third or fourth video that I've made on women's sport, and particularly these issues, is that one of the reasons this is really interesting is that we're living in a society now, of course, where most of us, I think, are in favour of gender equality and of men and women, males and females, all competing together, hopefully on as level playing field as we can for the same things. It's everybody for them fucking selves nowadays, right? Everybody for themselves to be judged on merit, and that is how we like it. But sport is an exception. Sport is the exception where we make, I'm not going to say an arbitrary distinction, because obviously there is a very real distinction between males and females in terms of the gametes they produce, which is how we define those things in the first place. But there is nevertheless a level of arbitrariness about it, and this is one of the things you see today. Yesterday, the IAAF were talking about female sport. Because this is what they're wanting to talk about, defining female sport and the levels that are normal for testosterone within female competitors. On another day, when they want to talk about trans-inclusionism, then they will be talking about women's sport and men's sport and defining what constitutes a woman. What a pickle we've got ourselves in with sport here, folks. We've got a history of sport, of course, where we just use those terms woman, female, man, male interchangeably, because that's how society used them, and we didn't differentiate. And now suddenly we want to differentiate between this idea of gender and gender identity and assigning woman to that, and the issue of biological sex and putting the title female to that. Of course, most of us would say, okay, so you can change your gender identity if you want to identify as a woman and you do certain things, then that's okay, but you can't change your biological sex. And this is where athletics gets into a bit of a pickle right from the get-go, because when you're talking about a female event or defining females, but then you're allowing trans women in where they're not females, so there's a little bit of an issue there. But I think it's good that we have this arbitrary category distinction, I think. I know there are some people who say, well, that's if you want equality, everybody has to compete together. Let me just read you what the IAAF said about this, which I thought was very, very reasonable here. It put down, the IAAF wants athletes to be incentivized to make the huge commitment and sacrifice required to excel in the sport, and so to inspire new generations to join the sport, athletics, and aspire to the same excellence. It does not want to risk discouraging those aspirations by having unfair competition conditions that deny athletes a fair opportunity to succeed. This is why they're justifying this lower testosterone level, and they've given some details here about the differences it makes. But let me read you this bit. Because of the significant advantages in size, strength, and power enjoyed on average by men over women from puberty onwards, due in large part to men's much higher levels of circulating testosterone and the impact that such advantages can have on sporting performance, it is generally accepted that competition between male and female athletes would not be fair and meaningful, and would risk discouraging women from participation in the sport. Therefore, in addition to separate competition categories based on age, the IAAF has also created separate competition categories for male and female athletes. Well, you could argue till the cows come home on whether it's fair, to have male and female athletes competing together, and it probably is fair, but I think they're absolutely right. What you would be doing is disenfranchising 50% of the population from sport, and I think that's a ridiculous thing to do. We have these sporting competitions to encourage people to take part in sport, to encourage people to enjoy sport, and if people enjoy, if that differentiation, if that point of differentiation is helpful, then so be it. But of course, where do we draw the line with that? Because there becomes an issue of arbitrariness. I know that some people have mentioned before about, well, clearly different ethnic groups have different advantages in different events, so maybe we should have 100 metres for West African runners and 100 metres for every fucker else. But of course, how do you define when somebody is mixed race and their great grandfather was West African? It just doesn't work like that, does it? But at least with this business of biological sex, we can make some point of differentiation there. But what a difference it makes. This is the problem. They're talking about not wanting to disenfranchise people, but what a pickle you get yourself into once you get away from that basic open category, that is what the men's event is, effectively, in any event. It's the men's open is what you're looking at, right? It's the men's open. Doesn't matter what age you are, doesn't matter who you are, as the IAAF have said, whilst they set certain quite stringent criteria for trans women, to be a trans man, all you've basically got to say is, I identify as a man, because effectively the man's event is an open event, right? It's just the best of everybody, effectively. That's what it amounts to. But once you start setting other criteria, then unless it's something like age, where you can have a birth certificate and hopefully, as long as that's genuine, everybody can see exactly where that is, it starts to get very, very murky. And that seems to be what's happening here. But it's very, very important, as they've said here. This is from the IAAF. In particular, increasing testosterone levels in women from 0.9 nanomoles per litre, which is a typical level for women, to just 7.3 nanomoles, which is still below the 10 level they had set, increases muscle mass by 4% and muscle strength by 12 to 26%. I mean, when you're talking about top-level elite athletics, where a 1% difference can mean the difference between winning an event and not even getting on the Olympic starting line to begin with, those are just astronomical differences we're talking about here. And one of the things I find interesting about discussing this business, this murky business of women's sport and all the pickles and that they're getting themselves into, is that I have a certain sort of dispassionate viewpoint from this, because really I couldn't give a toss. I'm not a female athlete. It's not my battle to fight. So I'm just interested to see how this plays out. But one of the details, and this is the bit that really, really was new to me, which just shows you how big this is, because I've had this discussion before and people have said, well, how many people does this actually apply to, right? This is a real fringe thing. This is what it said on the BBC's site on this, and this was a quote from the IAAF. It says, this is more than just this Seminea woman, you know. This is what it says. It says the sport has a lot of athletes with DSD, hyperandrogenism. It is not just the one or two females you hear about in the media. Listen to this figure. In elite female athletics, the number of intersex athletes is 140 times more than you might find in the normal female population. 140 times higher, which suggests to me that effectively, unless you have an intersex condition, that probably, if you're a woman, it doesn't even make any difference that men's events and women's events exist separately. You've got no more chance of winning than if everybody just competed together, which is a really, really depressing. It's probably no wonder I've never heard the IAAF talk about this before, because what a disincentive for women to take part in sport, in athletic sport, in a sport that requires physiological demands, right? When those are the kind of figures that you're talking about, and almost wherever we cut off the line. I mean, this latest one is being portrayed in South Africa by the ANC, party as racist. This is racist. It's because there's a black woman winning events. The fact that black women win virtually every other fucking track event and win every single men's event and nobody seems to give a damn about it. Why suddenly, right, well, Caster Semenya's black, so obviously this must be a racist thing, right? The fact is she'll just be replaced by another black runner, or if not this year, in 10 years' time, her event will be dominated by West African women, effectively at 800 metres, and East African women at anything beyond 1,500 metres. That's just going to be the way it's going to go. And the whole idea of the Olympic ideal of it becoming more and more of a mixing pot and everybody getting more and more chance, you know, it might be just these discrete areas of the world that are winning events now, but in the future everybody can compete on equal terms and it won't matter who you are. It'll just be who trains the hardest, and it's got further and further from that ideal, and now pretty much you can just tell from somebody's ethnic ancestry what events they have any chance of winning at the Olympics, even before they've done any training. Even from the age of a fucking couple of days old, you could make that prediction. But what a pickle this is getting itself into here. And what is the answer? Some level has to be set, right? If you even with this in, you're still going to have this kind of business where intersex female athletes are just 100 times overrepresented. And so if your business, if the whole purpose of having female separate events or women's separate events separate to begin with is not to disenfranchise women, how do you deal with this issue without... Where do you set the line without these constant accusations that you're discriminating against people who technically are absolutely female and have every right to say it, right? All these 140 times intersex female athletes, they will all actually technically be female. They will either be producing female gametes, eggs, ovum, or they will have the structures that if they weren't sterile to produce those things. It's a really, really fucking sticky situation. All I can say is I'm really, really fucking pleased that I don't work for the IAAF trying to work through this, because I honestly do not think there is anything that they can do about this that is going to be right. They are pretty much damned if they do and damned if they don't. Okay, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thanks for listening. Bye.